continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Blake Morrison stood in his kitchen, watching the morning sun filter through the pristine windows of his suburban home. At 38, he maintained the disciplined physique of his military years, though most people who knew him now saw only a successful private security consultant living the American dream. His wife Trinity hummed softly as she prepared coffee, her blonde hair catching the light in a way that once made his heart race. 15 years of Special Forces operations in classified locations had taught Blake to read people like open books. He could detect lies and micro-expressions, sense danger in environmental changes, and eliminate threats with surgical precision. Yet somehow, he had chosen to ignore the subtle signs that had been accumulating for months. Trinity's late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The new lingerie that never made an appearance in their bedroom. The way she avoided eye contact during intimate conversations. The expensive gifts she claimed were from her marketing job, despite him knowing her exact salary. "I'll be visiting my parents this weekend," Trinity announced, not looking up from her phone. "The house needs some maintenance work, and Dad's back is acting up again." Blake nodded, spooning eggs onto his plate. Frank and Dorothy Ashford had always treated him with polite distance, never quite accepting their daughter's choice to marry a man from Blake's blue-collar background. The old Victorian house on Elm Street had been Trinity's childhood home before her parents moved to a retirement community in Florida 2 years ago. "Need any help? I could drive up with you," Blake offered, though he knew the answer. "No, it's fine. Just boring family stuff. Besides, you have that Patterson security consultation this weekend." She was right about the consultation, but Blake found it curious how well Trinity tracked his schedule lately, almost as if she were ensuring she knew when he'd be unavailable. After Trinity left that Friday afternoon, Blake completed the Patterson job, a comprehensive security overhaul for a tech executive who'd receive credible threats. The work was routine, but it kept his tactical skills sharp. Blake had learned long ago that complacency could be fatal. By Saturday evening, an inexplicable restlessness had settled over him. His instincts, honed by years of dangerous operations, were sending subtle warnings he couldn't ignore. Something felt wrong about Trinity's story. On impulse, Blake drove to the Ashford house on Elm Street. He told himself he was being paranoid, that marriage counseling might be a better solution than surveillance. But as he turned onto the quiet street lined with mature oak trees, his training took over. The house sat dark and imposing against the night sky, its Victorian gingerbread trim casting intricate shadows in the moonlight. Blake parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories. The front door was locked, but Blake had learned lock-picking from a former CIA operative during a joint mission in Afghanistan. The skill proved useful now as he slipped inside the dusty interior. The house smelled of neglect and something else, something that made Blake's combat instincts flare to life. Following the scent, he climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The smell grew stronger as he approached the master bedroom. Blake pushed open the door and froze. A young woman, maybe 25, was handcuffed to the ornate brass bed frame. Her auburn hair was matted, her clothes dirty and torn. She looked up at Blake with eyes that held both terror and desperate hope. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth. Blake's military training kicked in instantly. He scanned the room for threats, confirmed they were alone, then approached the girl slowly to avoid frightening her further. "I'm here to help," he whispered, carefully removing the tape from her mouth. "Are you hurt?" "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "They said they'd kill me if I screamed. I've been here for 3 days." Blake examined the handcuffs, professional grade, not something purchased at a novelty store. "Who did this to you?" "A woman with blonde hair and a man with a scar on his neck. They knew things about me. Personal things. They said I needed to disappear for a while." Blake's blood turned to ice. Trinity had blonde hair, and she'd mentioned a new friend from her yoga class, someone named Victor who had a distinctive scar from a motorcycle accident. With hands that barely trembled, Blake called Trinity's number. "Hey, baby," Her voice came through the speaker, cheerful and normal. "How's your evening?" "I'm at your parents' house," Blake said carefully. "I was worried about you working here alone." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When Trinity spoke again, her tone had changed completely. "We don't live there anymore, Blake. Why would you go there?" The line went dead. Blake stared at his phone, then at the terrified young woman handcuffed to the bed. In that moment, he realized his marriage had been a carefully constructed lie, and he was about to discover just how deep the deception ran. Chapter 2: Shadows of Truth. Blake worked quickly to free the young woman, using a paperclip to pick the handcuff locks, another skill from his covert operations days. As the metal restraints clicked open, she rubbed her wrists and struggled to sit up. "What's your name?" Blake asked, helping her to the edge of the bed. "Iris Novak," she whispered. "I'm a journalist with the Metro Herald. I was investigating." "God, this is going to sound crazy." "Try me." Iris looked at Blake intently, as if measuring whether she could trust him. "I was investigating a human trafficking network operating through legitimate businesses. High-end escorts, forced labor, the works. The trail led me to a marketing firm downtown, Prestige Communications." Blake's stomach dropped. That was Trinity's company. 3 days ago, I was leaving the office after a meeting with a source when these two people approached me in the parking garage. The woman said she knew I'd been asking questions about her business. Before I could react, the man injected something into my neck. Blake helped Iris to her feet, noting she was steady despite her ordeal. "You said they knew personal things about you. Details only someone with access to police databases or government records would know. My social security number, my sister's address in Oregon, the fact that my parents died in a car accident when I was 16. Iris's voice strengthened as she spoke. "This isn't some random crime, Mr. Morrison." "Blake Morrison." He watched her reaction carefully. Iris's eyes widened. "Morrison? Are you married to Trinity Morrison from Prestige Communications?" "Yes." "Then you're in danger too. My investigation uncovered evidence that someone at Prestige has been using the company's client database to identify and target vulnerable women. Single mothers, recent immigrants, women with no family ties. They promise high-paying jobs, then force them into situations they can't escape." Blake's mind raced through the implications. Trinity's expensive gifts, her secretive phone calls, her precise knowledge of his schedule. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years, possibly longer. But here's the thing. The operation is too sophisticated for amateurs. Someone with serious resources and connections is running this. Blake helped Iris down the stairs, his military paranoia now in full operation mode. "We need to get you to safety and figure out our next move." "I can't go to the police," Iris said urgently. "Part of my investigation revealed that someone inside the police department is feeding information to the traffickers. That's how they stay ahead of any investigations." As they reached the front door, Blake's phone buzzed with a text message from Trinity. "Blake, I know you're confused. Meet me at Murphy's Diner on Highway 9 tomorrow at noon. I can explain everything." Blake showed the message to Iris. "She's trying to control the situation," she said immediately. "That's classic predator behavior. When confronted, they try to regain control through manipulation." "Murphy's Diner," Blake mused. "It's isolated, only one road in and out. Easy to monitor who's coming and going." "You're not actually going to meet her?" Blake's expression hardened, the soldier in him emerging. "Oh, I'm going, but not the way she expects." Blake drove Iris to a safe house he maintained, an unremarkable apartment downtown that he'd kept from his military days, unknown to Trinity or anyone else. It was stocked with cash, weapons, surveillance equipment, and everything needed to disappear or conduct operations. "This is where you'll stay until we sort this out," Blake told Iris as he activated the security system. "The building has facial recognition cameras, and I'll know if anyone approaches." Iris examined the apartment's sophisticated security setup. "You're not just a security consultant, are you?" "I used to solve problems for the government, the kind that don't exist in official records." Over the next several hours, Blake and Iris pieced together the scope of the operation. Using his contacts and private intelligence, Blake accessed records that painted a disturbing picture. Prestige Communications had client files on over 300 women who fit the trafficking profile. Cross-referencing with missing persons reports revealed that at least 20 of those women had disappeared over the past 2 years. Trinity's been using her legitimate job as cover, Blake realized. She identifies targets through the marketing consultations, then feeds their information to her partner. Victor Reyes, Iris said, pulling up a file on her laptop. I managed to photograph him before they grabbed me. Former military police, dishonorably discharged for assault. Since then, he's been connected to several criminal enterprises, but nothing that stuck in court. Blake studied Victor's photograph. The scar on his neck was prominent, and his eyes held the cold calculation Blake recognized in career criminals. Military police explains the professional handcuffs and injection technique. There's more, Iris said grimly. My source inside Prestige mentioned that Trinity and Victor have been planning something big. A final score before they disappear. Something involving a high-value target. Blake's phone buzzed again. Another text from Trinity. I love you, Blake. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Trust me one more time. This time, Blake responded, see you at noon tomorrow. But Blake Morrison was no longer the trusting husband. He was a hunter preparing to destroy his prey, and Trinity and Victor had no idea what kind of predator they had awakened. Chapter 3. The Trap Within the Trap. Blake spent the early morning hours conducting reconnaissance on Murphy's Diner. Located 15 miles outside the city on a rural highway, the diner sat in a valley surrounded by wooded hills. Perfect terrain for someone with Blake's training to observe and control. Using military-grade binoculars, Blake identified 3 vehicles positioned around the diner that didn't belong. A black sedan with tinted windows parked behind the building. A van with surveillance equipment barely visible through its rear windows, and a motorcycle hidden in the tree line. Victor's preferred mode of transportation based on Iris's intelligence. Trinity wasn't planning to explain anything. She was planning an ambush. Blake smiled grimly. They had underestimated him completely. By 11:30, Blake was positioned on a ridge overlooking the diner, wearing tactical gear and carrying enough firepower to handle a small army. Through his scope, he watched Trinity enter the diner and take a booth with clear sight lines to the entrance. She kept checking her phone nervously. At exactly noon, Blake's phone rang. Where are you? Trinity's voice was strained. I'm here waiting. I'm watching you, Blake replied calmly. Along with Victor in the sedan, 2 more men in the van, and someone on the motorcycle. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Blake, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and Victor have been trafficking women for at least 2 years. You used your job to identify targets, and he handled the kidnapping and disposal. You kept me around as cover, the respectable husband who provided legitimacy. That's not. Iris Novak told me everything. Blake interrupted. She's safe, by the way. Your plan to silence her failed. Another long pause. When Trinity spoke again, her voice had changed completely, cold and calculating. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Blake. Victor has connections you can't imagine. People in law enforcement, in government. If you interfere with our business, you'll disappear just like the others. Interesting threat from someone who's about to find out what 15 years of Black Ops training actually means. Blake ended the call and began moving. His first target was the motorcycle in the tree line. The rider never saw Blake coming. One moment, he was monitoring radio chatter from the van. The next, he was unconscious from a precisely applied chokehold. Blake zip-tied the man's hands and feet, took his radio and weapons, then sabotaged the motorcycle's engine. The van was parked on a service road behind the diner. Blake approached from the vehicle's blind spot, using skills learned in urban warfare environments. Through the van's rear window, he could see 2 men monitoring electronic surveillance equipment. Blake attached a small explosive device to the van's fuel tank. Not enough to kill, but sufficient to disable the vehicle and create chaos. He set the timer for 3 minutes, then moved toward the sedan. Victor Reyes was exactly where Blake expected him to be, positioned behind the diner with a clear view of the front entrance. The former military police officer was well-trained, but he was focused on watching for Blake to arrive, not on defending against an attack from behind. Blake's approach was silent and professional. He disabled Victor with a combat knife, placed precisely at the base of his skull, applying just enough pressure to penetrate skin without causing permanent damage. "Move, and I'll sever your spinal cord," Blake whispered. Victor froze completely. "Blake? Are you safe?" "For now." "What did you find?" Trinity's computer files contain a complete client database with over 400 women. But that's not the worst part. I found financial records showing payments to law enforcement officials, court personnel, even someone in the FBI. Blake closed his eyes, absorbing the scope of the corruption. "How high does it go?" Deputy Director Charles Brennan has been receiving monthly payments of $50,000. "Blake, this network has protection at the federal level." Blake looked back at Trinity and Victor, who were watching him intently. "Then the official channels are compromised. We'll have to handle this differently." "What do you mean?" "I mean some problems require permanent solutions." Blake ended the call and returned to the booth. Trinity and Victor had been whispering urgently, but fell silent as he approached. "Good news," Blake announced. "My journalist friend has found evidence of your entire network, including your corrupt protectors. Bad news for you is that the corruption goes so high that normal legal channels can't be trusted." Victor sneered. "So you're stuck. You can't turn us in without risking your precious evidence disappearing." "Actually," Blake said, settling back into his seat, "it just means I'm free to handle this my way." Blake pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photographs he'd taken during his reconnaissance. The disabled surveillance van, the unconscious operatives, the sabotaged motorcycle. "You see, the beautiful thing about having your entire support network compromised is that no one will investigate too closely when you disappear. Your corrupt cops will assume you left town to avoid exposure. Your government contacts will be too busy covering their own tracks to look for you." Trinity's face went pale. "Blake, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Blake replied. "You've enslaved innocent women, murdered journalists, and corrupted the justice system. You think you deserve to live after that." Victor lunged across the table, but Blake was ready. The former Special Forces operative moved with lethal precision, grabbing Victor's throat and slamming him back into his seat. "Try that again, and I'll demonstrate what a collapsed windpipe sounds like," Blake said calmly. He looked at Trinity, seeing the full scope of her evil for the first time. "I loved you. I trusted you. I built my life around you. And you used all of that to cover your crimes against innocent people." "Blake, please." "The woman I married doesn't exist," Blake continued. "She was just a mask worn by a monster. And monsters need to be put down." Blake stood up, his decision made. Trinity and Victor had corrupted the system designed to bring them to justice. That left only one option. It was time for Blake Morrison to return to what he did best, eliminating threats to innocent people. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Preparation. Blake zip-tied Trinity and Victor to their booth seats, ensuring they couldn't escape while he prepared for what came next. From his vehicle, he retrieved a duffel bag containing specialized equipment from his military days, items he'd hoped never to use again. "What are you planning?" Trinity asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake ignored her, methodically laying out his tools on the table. Zip ties, duct tape, tactical restraints, and a selection of implements designed for information extraction. "This is insane," Victor said, but his bravado was gone now. "You're talking about murder. That makes you just like us." Blake looked at Victor with cold disgust. "I killed enemy combatants who were trying to harm innocent people. You enslaved innocent women for profit and murdered journalists for asking questions. We are nothing alike." Blake's phone rang. "Iris." "Blake, I've been monitoring police scanners. Multiple units are heading toward the diner. Someone must have reported the explosion. How long do I have?" "Maybe 15 minutes. Blake looked at his prisoners, then made a decision. "I'm moving them to a secure location. Continue analyzing the files. I want a complete list of victims and collaborators." "Blake, what are you planning to do?" "What should have been done years ago." Blake cut Trinity and Victor's restraints, then forced them at gunpoint toward the diner's rear exit. His vehicle, a modified SUV with reinforced windows and run-flat tires, was parked behind the building. Where are you taking us? Trinity demanded. Somewhere we won't be interrupted. Blake drove deep into the mountains, following logging roads that hadn't seen traffic in years. His destination was an abandoned mining facility he'd scouted during his reconnaissance of the area. Remote, soundproof, and equipped with industrial equipment that could prove useful. The mining office building still had electricity and water, maintained by a caretaker service that Blake had used for legitimate security training exercises. No one would disturb them here. Blake secured Trinity and Victor in separate rooms, then began his interrogation. I want a complete list of every woman you've trafficked, Blake told Victor. Names, dates, locations. I want to know which ones are still alive and where they're being held. Go to hell, Victor spat. Blake pulled out a device that looked like a modified car battery charger. This is a field interrogation kit, military issue. It delivers precisely calibrated electrical impulses designed to cause maximum pain without permanent damage, unless I adjust the settings. Victor's face went pale. I used this on Taliban commanders who were planning suicide attacks on civilian markets, Blake continued. They always talked eventually. The question is how much pain you want to endure first. You're bluffing. You're not a killer. Blake attached the electrodes to Victor's wrists. I've killed 47 people in defense of innocent lives. Adding one more won't bother me. The first pulse made Victor scream and convulse against his restraints. That was level 1, Blake said calmly. There are 10 levels. Level 6 causes permanent nerve damage. Level 10 stops the heart. Wait. Victor gasped. I'll tell you what you want to know. Over the next hour, Victor provided a complete breakdown of their operation. 17 women were currently being held in various locations around the city. Another 23 had been sold to clients in other states. The rest, Victor's voice broke as he admitted, had been murdered when they became too difficult to control. Blake recorded everything, his rage building with each revelation. The clients, Blake said, I want names and addresses. Victor hesitated, then provided a list that included politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Blake moved to Trinity's room next. Your turn, he said simply. Trinity tried a different approach, seduction, manipulation, appeals to their shared history. None of it worked. You're not the woman I married, Blake told her. That woman was a fiction created to provide cover for a monster. The monster is who you really are. When Trinity refused to cooperate, Blake applied the same techniques he'd used on Victor. She broke more quickly, providing financial records, client lists, and details about the corrupt officials who protected their operation. The women who are still alive, Blake said. Where are they being held? Good. Now we're going to have a conversation about your business model. Blake zip-tied Victor's hands behind his back and confiscated his weapons. 2 pistols, a knife, and a taser. Then he marched Victor toward the diner's rear entrance just as the van exploded in the distance. Trinity burst out of the diner at the sound of the explosion, her composure finally cracking. She stopped short when she saw Blake pushing Victor ahead of him at knife point. Hello, Trinity, Blake said conversationally. I think it's time we had that explanation you promised. Trinity's face cycled through fear, anger, and desperation before settling on defiance. You can't prove anything. Whatever that journalist told you, it's her word against ours. Actually, I can prove quite a lot. Blake produced a small recording device. For instance, I can prove you just threatened to have me killed by Victor's government connections. I can prove you admitted to running a human trafficking operation. And I can prove you've been lying to me for years. Blake, please. Trinity's voice took on a pleading tone. We can work this out. The money we've made, there's enough to disappear together. Start over somewhere else. Blake studied his wife's face, seeing clearly for the first time the cold calculation behind her blue eyes. You really think I'd become your accomplice? Help you traffic innocent women? You killed people in the military, Trinity shot back. How is this different? I killed enemies who were trying to harm innocent people, Blake replied. You enslaved innocent people for profit. If you can't see the difference, then you're even more lost than I thought. Victor struggled against his restraints. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Morrison. This operation has protection at levels you can't reach. Blake pressed the knife deeper, drawing a drop of blood. Keep talking. I'm recording everything. Blake, Trinity said desperately. I love you. I always have. This business, it was Victor's idea. He manipulated me, made me think we needed the money. Blake looked at his wife with disgust. Even now, you're lying. Iris's investigation shows you initiated contact with Victor, not the other way around. You recruited him because you needed someone with military skills to handle the physical aspects of the operation. Trinity's mask finally dropped completely. Fine. Yes, I started it. Yes, I used my job to find targets. And yes, I married you because a special forces husband provided perfect cover. But you know what, Blake? I don't regret any of it. Those women were weak. They allowed themselves to be victims. Blake stared at this stranger who wore his wife's face. And now you're going to face justice for what you've done to them. What justice? Trinity laughed bitterly. You think the police will believe you? Victor's right about our connections. By tomorrow, you'll be wanted for assault and kidnapping, and we'll be free. Blake smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made both Trinity and Victor take involuntary steps backward. Who said anything about involving the police? Chapter 4. The Network Revealed. Blake forced Trinity and Victor into the diner at knife point, herding them toward a back booth where they couldn't be seen from the road. The waitress, an elderly woman named Agnes, had fled when the van exploded, leaving the restaurant empty. Sit, Blake commanded, positioning himself where he could watch both the front door and his prisoners. We're going to discuss the full scope of your operation. Victor remained defiant despite the blood trickling down his neck. You're making a mistake, Morrison. People know we're here. When we don't check in. You mean like your 3 associates who are currently unconscious and zip-tied? Blake interrupted. I've already disabled your entire support team. Trinity's eyes darted between Blake and the front windows. You can't hold us here indefinitely. Someone will call the police. Let them come, Blake said calmly. I have recordings of both of you admitting to human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder, plus physical evidence from the house on Elm Street and Iris Novak's testimony. Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used when interrogating insurgents. But I'm more interested in the scope of your network. Iris mentioned you have protection in law enforcement and government. I want names. Victor laughed harshly. You think we give up our protection? You're stupider than I thought. Blake pulled out his combat knife and placed it on the table between them. The blade caught the fluorescent light, its edge honed to surgical sharpness. I've extracted information from Taliban commanders and Russian intelligence operatives, Blake said conversationally. Compared to them, you two are amateurs. Trinity's bravado cracked slightly. Blake, you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Use the same techniques I use to protect American lives overseas? The difference is, you two are actually guilty of the crimes I'm investigating. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris. Found something big in Trinity's files. Call me when safe. Your journalist friend is still digging, Blake told them. She's very thorough. I suspect she's already found evidence that will implicate your entire network. Victor's jaw tightened. Novak is a problem that needs to be eliminated. Interesting choice of words, Blake said, starting the recording app on his phone. Please elaborate on how you eliminate problems. We make them disappear, Victor said coldly. Permanently, just like we're going to do with you. Trinity shot Victor a warning look, but the damage was done. Blake nodded thoughtfully. So you admit to murder. How many women have you killed, Victor? Enough to perfect the technique. Blake, stop this, Trinity pleaded. Victor doesn't know what he's saying. He's in shock from the injury. Actually, he's being very helpful, Blake replied. Keep going, Victor. Tell me about your government connections. Victor seemed to realize he was being manipulated, but his anger overrode his caution. You want to know about connections? Fine. Detective Ray Hutchins with Metro PD has been feeding us information about investigations for 18 months. He gets 20% of our profits. Anyone else? Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos helps us identify which cases to worry about and which ones will disappear. She's been very useful. Trinity looked horrified. Victor, shut up. But Victor was beyond reason now, his military training warped by years of criminal activity. And your precious Iris Novak? She's not the first journalist who got too close. We dealt with two others, a reporter from Channel 7 and a freelancer who was investigating missing persons cases. Blake felt cold fury building in his chest. Dealt with them how? The same way we deal with all problems. They went for boat rides and forgot how to swim. Blake had heard enough. These weren't just criminals. They were serial killers operating under the protection of corrupt officials. The justice system they had compromised couldn't be trusted to handle them properly. I need to make a phone call, Blake announced, standing up. Don't move. Blake walked to the front of the diner and called Iris. There's a warehouse on Industrial Boulevard, Trinity sobbed. And a house in Riverside. Blake, please, I can help you rescue them. I know where everything is. You're going to help me, Blake agreed. But not the way you think. Blake spent the evening reviewing the intelligence he'd gathered. 17 women held in 2 locations, guarded by at least 6 armed men. Multiple corrupt officials who would interfere with any official rescue attempt. And a client list that read like a who's who of the city's power structure. The scope of the problem was beyond what any individual could handle through legal channels. But Blake wasn't planning to use legal channels. He called Iris from a secure phone. I have intelligence on the entire operation, he told her. Locations, victim names, client lists, financial records. Everything needed to expose the network. That's incredible. We can take this to federal authorities. The corruption goes to the federal level, Blake interrupted. Deputy Director Brennan at the FBI has been taking payments. We can't trust official channels. Then what do? You're going to release everything to the media. Every major news outlet, every social media platform, every journalist in the country. Make it impossible to suppress or ignore. What about the women who are still being held? Blake looked through the window at Trinity and Victor, who were secured in the mining facilities holding cells. I'm going to rescue them. Tonight. Blake, you can't do this alone. It's too dangerous. I've conducted solo rescue operations in hostile territory before. This is what I'm trained for. Blake ended the call and began preparing for what would likely be the most important mission of his life. 17 innocent women were counting on him, whether they knew it or not. And Trinity and Victor were about to learn what happened to people who enslave the innocent. Chapter 6, The Reckoning begins. Blake stood over Trinity and Victor in their separate holding cells, both now restrained with military-grade restraints that left no possibility of escape. The mining facility's isolation was perfect. No one would hear what happened next. Before I rescue the women you've enslaved, Blake said calmly, you're going to experience exactly what you put them through. Trinity looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Blake, I know you hate me, but please, we could disappear together. Start over. I can change. Blake studied the woman he'd once loved, seeing only a predator desperate to escape consequences. You spent years lying to my face while you tortured innocent people. You married me to provide cover for your crimes. Every kiss, every I love you, every moment of intimacy was just part of your deception. That's not true. I did love you. You loved having cover for your operations, Blake interrupted. A special forces husband provided credibility and protection. That's all I ever was to you. Blake turned to Victor, who was trying to maintain his defiance despite the circumstances. And you took Trinity's weakness and turned it into something monstrous. You convinced her that innocent people were acceptable casualties for your profit. Those women made their own choices, Victor snarled. They wanted easy money. We just showed them the reality of their decisions. Blake pulled out his combat knife, its blade gleaming in the fluorescent light. Let me show you the reality of your decisions. Blake began with Victor's expensive watch, cutting it off his wrist. Then his wallet, his phone, his jewelry, everything that represented his identity and status. Strip, Blake commanded. What? You heard me. Everything off. Now, when Victor hesitated, Blake pressed the knife to his throat. Your victims were forced to strip for your clients. Experience what they experienced. Humiliated and terrified, Victor complied. Blake repeated the process with Trinity, ignoring her pleas and tears. Your victims felt this same humiliation, this same helplessness. The difference is they were innocent. Blake handcuffed both prisoners to chains hanging from the ceiling, the same position their victims had been forced to endure. Then he left them alone in the dark, cold cells. "I'll be back," Blake announced. "Think about what your victims went through while I'm gone rescuing the women you enslaved." Blake drove toward the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard, his vehicle loaded with tactical gear and weapons. Through Iris's intelligence network, he confirmed that 6 armed guards were holding 9 women in the converted warehouse. The building sat in an industrial area surrounded by empty lots and abandoned structures, perfect for Blake's purposes. Using night vision equipment, he conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the facility. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter. 2 more were stationed inside the main warehouse area. Another 2 monitored the office areas where the women were likely being held. Blake began his assault at midnight. The first perimeter guard never saw Blake coming. A sleeper hold rendered him unconscious in seconds. Blake zip-tied him and moved to the second guard, who was eliminated with equal efficiency. Entry into the warehouse required more finesse. Blake used lock-picking skills to access a side door, then moved through the building with the silent precision of a professional operator. The 2 interior guards were positioned near a bank of security monitors. Blake approached from her blind spot and neutralized both simultaneously, one with a chokehold, the other with a pressure point technique that caused instant unconsciousness. Blake found the women in a series of converted office spaces that had been turned into makeshift cells. They were in various states of physical and psychological trauma, some barely conscious from drugs, others huddled in corners terrified to move. "I'm here to rescue you," Blake announced softly. "My name is Blake Morrison. I'm going to get you out of here." The rescue operation took 30 minutes. Blake used his military medical training to assess each woman's condition, providing immediate first aid where needed. He called for ambulances and trauma counselors, ensuring each victim would receive appropriate care. As sirens approached the warehouse, Blake disappeared into the night. He had one more location to hit before dawn. The house in Riverside presented different challenges. It was located in a residential neighborhood where stealth was more critical than firepower. Blake's approach had to be surgical. Using surveillance equipment, he confirmed that 8 women were being held in the basement level of an apparently normal suburban home. Guards provided security, and neighbors were close enough to hear gunfire. Blake's solution was elegant and brutal. He cut the power to the entire block, then used the confusion to enter the house through a second-story window. Moving through the darkened building like a ghost, he systematically eliminated each guard using silent techniques. The women in the basement were in worse condition than those at the warehouse. Several showed signs of severe physical abuse, and all were suffering from malnutrition and psychological trauma. Blake called 911 from the guard's phone, reporting a medical emergency at the address. Then he vanished before emergency responders arrived. By dawn, 17 women had been rescued, and dozens of media outlets were receiving comprehensive intelligence packages from IRIS documenting the entire trafficking network. The corruption scandal was about to explode across every news channel in the country. Blake returned to the mining facility as the sun rose over the mountains. Trinity and Victor were still chained in their cells, exhausted and terrified from a night of experiencing what their victims had endured. "How does it feel?" Blake asked them. "Being helpless, not knowing what's going to happen to you? That's what you put those women through, except their ordeal lasted months or years." "Blake," Trinity whispered, "please. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but I can help you ensure this never happens again. I can testify against the corrupt officials." Blake looked at his wife, former wife. He corrected himself with something approaching pity. "You still don't understand. This isn't about justice anymore. This is about consequences." Blake pulled out his phone and showed them news footage from the rescue operations. Emergency responders treating traumatized women, police arresting guards, FBI agents raiding government offices as the corruption scandal exploded. "The women you enslaved are free," Blake announced. "Your network is exposed. Your corrupt protectors are being arrested. Everything you built is destroyed." "Then it's over," Victor said desperately. "You won. Let us go. Blake smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made both prisoners recoil. Let you go? After what you've done? Blake shook his head. No, we're just getting started. Chapter 7. Justice Delivered. Blake stood in the mining facility's main room, surrounded by the evidence of Trinity and Victor's crimes spread across multiple tables. Financial records, victim photos, client lists, and recorded confessions created a comprehensive picture of their trafficking network's scope and brutality. On his laptop, news coverage played continuously. FBI raids on corrupt officials' homes. Emergency responders treating rescued victims. Politicians and police officers being arrested in handcuffs. The scandal was dominating every news cycle in the country. You see this. Blake called to his prisoners. This is what happens when monsters get exposed to the light. Trinity and Victor, still chained in their cells, looked haggard after their night of experiencing helplessness. But Blake wasn't finished with them yet. I've been thinking about appropriate consequences for your crimes, Blake announced, walking between their cells. The justice system you corrupted can't be trusted to handle this properly. Too many of your collaborators are still in positions of power. Blake pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage he'd recorded during the rescue operations. 17 women freed from your operation. But according to your confessions, you murdered at least 34 others over the past 2 years. Blake, please, Trinity begged. I can help you find the bodies. Give their families closure. Isn't that worth something? It might be, Blake agreed, if I believed you were capable of genuine remorse. But you're not. You're just trying to manipulate me one more time. Blake activated a wall-mounted television screen. On it, interviews with the rescued women played silently, their faces blurred to protect their identities, but their words devastating in their impact. These women are telling their stories, Blake said, about how you lured them with false job offers, how you drugged them, chained them, forced them to service your clients, how you murdered the ones who tried to escape. Victor tried to maintain his defiance. You can't prove the murders. You have no physical evidence. Blake pulled out a recorder and played Victor's voice from the previous day, the same way we deal with all problems. They went for boat rides and forgot how to swim. Actually, I have very detailed confessions from both of you. Admissions to murder, trafficking, corruption, everything needed to ensure you never hurt anyone again. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris. All evidence packages delivered to media. Story breaking on every major network. Federal task force being assembled to investigate corruption. You did it, Blake. Blake showed the message to his prisoners. My journalist friend has ensured your crimes will be front-page news for months. Every detail of your operation, every victim's story, every corrupt official you bribed, all of it public knowledge. Then why are you keeping us here? Trinity demanded. Turn us over to the FBI. Let the system handle us. Blake laughed bitterly. The system? The same system where Deputy Director Brennan was taking $50,000 a month from your operation? The system where Detective Hutchins fed you information about investigations? The system where ADA Santos made your criminal cases disappear? Blake walked to a wall display showing organizational charts of their network's corruption. Even with the evidence I've provided, how many of these officials will actually face meaningful consequences? How many will make deals, claim ignorance, or simply resign quietly? That's not our fault, Victor protested. It's exactly your fault, Blake replied coldly. You created this network of corruption specifically to protect yourselves from consequences. You made justice impossible through legal channels. Blake pulled out a set of photographs, crime scene images he'd obtained through his intelligence contacts. These are the burial sites where you disposed of your murder victims. Remote locations where you thought they'd never be found. Trinity's face went white. How did you? I have resources you never imagined, Blake said. Military contacts, intelligence operatives, private investigators. People who care about justice more than bureaucratic procedures. Blake activated another screen showing GPS coordinates and satellite imagery. 34 graves scattered across 3 states. The FBI is already conducting recovery operations based on the intelligence I provided. You're going to turn us in then? Victor asked hopefully. Blake studied both prisoners for a long moment. Turn you in to face trial by the same judicial system you corrupted? Watch you hire expensive lawyers and make plea deals with prosecutors you've been bribing for years? Blake pulled out a military field manual and opened it to a chapter on field justice. During the war, when we captured enemy operatives who had committed crimes against civilians, we sometimes couldn't rely on local authorities to handle justice properly. The authorities were either corrupt or compromised. What are you saying? Trinity whispered. I'm saying that sometimes when the system fails, individuals have to ensure justice is served. Blake walked to a storage cabinet and removed several items: rope, concrete blocks, chains, and a waterproof tarp. During your confessions, you describe how you murdered your victims by taking them on boat rides and making them forget how to swim, drowning in deep water where the bodies would never be recovered. Both prisoners began struggling against their restraints and panic. Blake, you can't. Trinity screamed. I'm your wife. You love me. You're not my wife, Blake replied calmly. My wife was a fiction created by a monster to provide cover for trafficking operations. The monster is who you really are. Blake began preparing his equipment with military precision. 34 innocent women died because of your actions. 17 more suffered months or years of torture and sexual slavery. Dozens of families were destroyed. We'll confess everything, Victor shouted. Full cooperation. We'll testify against everyone. Your confessions are already recorded, Blake said. The evidence is already in the hands of investigators. The media has the story. Your testimony isn't needed anymore. Blake attached concrete blocks to chains with practiced efficiency. The beautiful thing about your chosen method of murder is that it leaves no physical evidence. Bodies lost in deep water, never to be recovered. Blake, please. Trinity sobbed. I know I can never make up for what I've done, but please don't do this. Blake looked at his former wife with complete coldness. Did you show mercy to any of your victims when they begged for their lives? The silence was answer enough. Blake loaded his equipment into his vehicle, then returned for his prisoners. Time to go for a boat ride. Chapter 8. The Deep Water. Blake drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Lake Meridian, a deep mountain lake 40 miles from the mining facility. Trinity and Victor sat in the back of his SUV, still restrained, their faces reflecting the terror their victims had once felt. Blake, Trinity tried one final time. I know you think I never loved you, but that's not true. Yes, I married you initially for cover, but over time... Stop. Blake's voice cut through her words like a blade. Every word you speak is another lie. You're incapable of love. You're a predator who learned to mimic human emotions. The lake came into view as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Blake had chosen this location carefully. Deep water, isolated, no witnesses. The same criteria Trinity and Victor had used when disposing of their murder victims. Blake parked at an abandoned boat ramp and began unloading his equipment. A small motorboat was secured to a hidden dock, acquired through his network of military contacts who didn't ask questions about operational requirements. Please, Victor begged as Blake loaded the concrete blocks into the boat. I'll do anything. Give you money, information, whatever you want. I want the 34 women you murdered to be alive, Blake replied. Can you give me that? Blake forced his prisoners into the boat at gunpoint, securing them to the seats with professional restraints. The boat engine started smoothly, carrying them toward the lake's deepest point. During the war, Blake said conversationally as they moved across the water, I learned that some enemies can't be reformed or rehabilitated. They're too damaged, too committed to evil. The only way to protect innocent people is to eliminate the threat permanently. Trinity was sobbing openly now. Blake, our marriage meant something. I know it did. You can't kill your own wife. You're not my wife, Blake repeated. You're a stranger who wore my wife's face while committing atrocities. The woman I married never existed. Blake stopped the boat over the lake's deepest point, nearly 200 feet of cold, dark water. According to his research, bodies weighted with concrete blocks would sink to depths where they'd never be recovered. Any last words? Blake asked, preparing the chains and weights. Wait, Victor shouted desperately. There's something else. Something you don't know. Blake paused. What? The operation. It's bigger than just trafficking. We were recruiting the women for something else too. Something that would have made us millions. Elaborate. Victor looked at Trinity, who shook her head frantically. Don't tell him, she whispered. Snuff films, Victor said, his voice breaking. We were making snuff films with some of the women. High-end clients who paid premium prices to watch murders on live video feeds. Blake felt his blood turn to ice. How many? 7 so far. The clients paid $500,000 each to watch. Blake stared at these monsters who had exceeded even his worst estimates of their depravity. You filmed murders for entertainment? Blake, don't listen to him, Trinity pleaded. Victor's lying. He's trying to shock you. She planned it, Victor interrupted. The snuff films were Trinity's idea. She said we could make more money from killing them than keeping them alive. Blake looked at Trinity, seeing the truth in her eyes before she could form another lie. The clients, Blake said quietly. I want names. Blake, please. Names. Blake roared, his composure finally cracking. Terrified by his fury, Trinity provided a list that included politicians, celebrities, business leaders, people who paid enormous sums to watch innocent women being murdered for their entertainment. Blake recorded everything, then transmitted the information to Iris with a simple message: additional evidence. Ensure this reaches the task force immediately. Now you know everything, Victor said desperately. That's worth something, right? Information like this. Blake attached the first set of chains and concrete blocks to Victor's restraints. Information like this proves you're even more depraved than I thought. Blake, wait. Trinity screamed. I can help you catch the snuff film clients. I know where the videos are stored, how to access the payment systems. I already have that information from your confessions and computer files, Blake replied. The FBI will find everything they need. Blake lifted Victor to the edge of the boat. The former military police officer tried to struggle, but the restraints and weights made movement impossible. Any of your murder victims who begged for mercy? Blake asked. Victor's face twisted with rage and fear. You're a killer just like us now, Morrison. What does that make you? The difference, Blake said calmly, is that I kill monsters to protect innocent people. You killed innocent people to become monsters. Blake pushed Victor over the side. The weighted chains pulled him under immediately, his final scream cut short by the dark water. Blake turned to Trinity, who was hyperventilating with terror. Blake, please, she whispered. I know I can never earn your forgiveness, but please don't do this. Find some other way. Blake studied the woman who had shared his bed while planning murders for profit. What other way? Life in prison where you'll manipulate guards and other inmates? Escape attempts funded by your hidden assets? Plea bargains that reduce your sentence. Blake attached the chains to Trinity's restraints. You corrupted the justice system specifically to avoid consequences. There is no other way. Blake, I love you, Trinity said desperately. Whatever else I've done, that part was real. Please don't let your last memory of me be like this. Blake looked into Trinity's eyes and spoke with quiet finality. My last memory of you is finding Iris Novak handcuffed to a bed in your operation. Everything before that was a lie. Blake lifted Trinity to the edge of the boat. She wasn't struggling anymore, just staring at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Our wedding vows, she whispered. Till death do us part. You promised. Death has already parted us, Blake replied. You died the moment you chose to become a monster. Blake pushed his former wife into the dark water and watched her disappear beneath the surface. The lake returned to stillness, its depths now holding the final remains of a trafficking network that had destroyed dozens of lives. Blake sat in the boat for several minutes, feeling something settle inside him. Not satisfaction, but a sense of completion. Justice had been served. The innocent were protected. The monsters were gone. Blake started the boat engine and headed back to shore. He had cleanup work to finish and a new life to begin. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 3 months later, Blake Morrison sat in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, reading news coverage of the Federal Task Force's final report on the trafficking network. The investigation had uncovered evidence of corruption that reached the highest levels of government, resulting in dozens of arrests and resignations. Deputy Director Charles Brennan faced life in prison for racketeering and conspiracy. Detective Ray Hutchins had been found dead in his jail cell, an apparent suicide. AITA Maria Santos had fled the country and was wanted on international warrants. The snuff film network had been completely exposed, with clients facing charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to financing criminal enterprises. Several high-profile politicians and business leaders had been arrested in coordinated raids. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Iris Novak, meeting with documentary producers today. They want to tell the complete story of how the network was exposed and the victims were rescued. You sure you don't want to participate? Blake typed back, "The victims' stories are what matter. Keep me anonymous." Blake had disappeared from his old life completely. Officially, Blake Morrison had died in a boating accident on Lake Meridian, the same accident that killed Trinity Morrison and Victor Reyes when their boat was found capsized with no survivors. In reality, Blake had used skills learned during his Special Forces years to create a new identity. Thomas Blake was a security consultant based in Portland, with impeccable references and a background that would withstand careful scrutiny. The insurance money from Trinity's death had been donated anonymously to organizations that helped trafficking victims. Blake had no interest in profiting from her crimes. Blake's new apartment was spartanly furnished but comfortable. He'd returned to the simple life he'd known before marriage, finding peace in routine and solitude. The nightmares had stopped after the first month. His phone rang. A potential client needing security consultation for her small business. Blake Security Solutions, this is Tom. Mr. Blake? My name is Sarah Chun. I run a women's shelter downtown, and we've been having some security issues. Break-ins, threatening phone calls. Could you help us? Blake smiled. I'd be happy to help. Where would you like to meet? Blake spent the afternoon at the shelter, assessing security needs and meeting with staff. The women staying there reminded him of the trafficking victims he'd rescued, survivors working to rebuild their lives after experiencing unspeakable trauma. We don't have much budget for security upgrades, Sarah explained apologetically. Don't worry about the cost, Blake replied. Consider this pro bono work. Blake installed a comprehensive security system over the following week, including cameras, alarms, and panic buttons. He also trained the staff in basic security protocols and provided his personal contact information for emergencies. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked as Blake completed the installation. You could make more money working for corporations. Blake looked at the women in the shelter's common area. Mothers with children, young women trying to start over, elderly women who had nowhere else to go. Sometimes protecting innocent people is more important than making money, he said simply. Blake's new life settled into a satisfying routine. Security consultations during the day, volunteer work at the shelter in the evenings, martial arts training to stay sharp. No romantic relationships. He wasn't ready to trust anyone with that level of intimacy again. On the anniversary of Trinity and Victor's deaths, Blake drove to a mountain overlook near Lake Meridian, not to mourn them, but to reflect on the path that had led him here. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The last of the trafficking network's major clients had been sentenced. A former senator who received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder in the snuff film operations. Blake deleted the alert without reading the details. That chapter of his life was closed. As the sun set over the mountains, Blake received a call from Sarah at the shelter. Tom, we have a situation. A woman just arrived with her 2 children. She's been trafficked for 3 years and finally escaped. She's terrified her captors will find her. Blake was already walking toward his vehicle. I'll be right there. Blake Morrison was dead, killed by the betrayal that had destroyed his marriage and his faith in the justice system. Thomas Blake was someone different, a protector who used his skills to help innocent people rebuild their lives. He'd found his purpose again, not as a husband living a suburban fantasy, but as a guardian standing between predators and their prey. Blake drove toward the shelter as night fell over the city. There were people who needed protection, and he would provide it. Some threats required legal solutions. Others required permanent ones. Blake was prepared for both. In his rearview mirror, the lake disappeared into darkness, holding its secrets beneath the deep water. The monsters were gone, the innocent were protected, and justice had been served. Blake Morrison was finally at peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.